Okay, so I'm Rachel Mills and I'm the Dean of Natural and Environmental Sciences, but really this is where I work. I'm an ocean chemist, so I study that stuff out there, and I've worked here for something like 23 years now. So what about you?
Excellent. My name is Philip Hoare. I was born here. I work as Professor of Creative Writing at the University English Department. I have no scientific background whatsoever, but I love talking to scientists like you. So Rachel, what brought you to the sea?
I think I came to it quite late, actually. So I grew up in the Midlands, landlocked, grew up in Birmingham, and we used to obviously visit the ocean all the time, but I can't talk about a childhood inspiration about the ocean. I came to Southampton to study chemistry, and I didn't even at that point know about oceanography. I didn't know it was a thing. And I came here, and well, this place wasn't here then. I was studying chemistry. I wasn't a great chemist, but I did a module in oceanography. And I'd never actually studied the ocean at all. And I met all these people that were passionate about the ocean, and they sent me an essay to write about these things that have recently been discovered, these deep sea hydrothermal vents, we call them, where the volcanoes erupt on the seafloor and the hot water comes out. And I read this book. I went to the library and got it out the other day, and it's probably the same version that I read when I was a student. And this book's written by a chap called Jerry Van Andel, who unfortunately isn't alive anymore. But he was a beautiful writer, and he describes being an oceanographer. Well, he was a geologist, actually, but he was a geologist that went to sea on ships and studied the ocean. And I was just, this transformed me. It made me realise that we know next to nothing about what's out there. We know so little about the deep sea floor that even in the 1970s, this is written in 77, they were discovering new things that no one on this planet had imagined should be there or had ever observed. And I thought, this is what I want to do. So that was my moment of just let's get out there and study this.
That's amazing, because it is this notion of this extraordinary other volume that we share this planet with, which exists, which 90% of the world's biomass resides out there, and we have the sort of hubris to believe that we have kind of dominion over this planet. And then there you are discovering chemosynthetic life, this life which actually is almost an affront to that notion of dominion, because it actually doesn't even need the sun to exist. It's amazing. I mean, so what are your physical interactions with the sea? I'd love to know that.
Well, to get down there, we have to get into the ocean, and we have to first of all, we go out on a ship, and so 20 or 30 scientists will group together, get on a ship, and sail from here out to the middle of the ocean. It might take a week to get out there, so we're at sea for maybe a month at a time, and boy, does that, you work as a team, you get to know those people, they're friends for the rest of your life. You get to the spot on the ocean surface where, 3-4 miles down, we're trying to study the seafloor, and we either use a robot, which is tethered to the ship, or we get into a little submarine and actually go down to the deep sea floor. And that again is probably one of the most exciting things I've ever done, is actually dive in a submarine to the deep sea floor, 3,700 metres down on the mid-Atlantic ridge, looking out of a little porthole, where we can sort of see these vents erupting on the seafloor. That's
extraordinary. I think that's the sort of thing I think about a lot here in Southampton, because we're here in a port. This is where I grew up. I have a great deep fear of the sea. I didn't learn to swim until I was in my late 20s. Because it's an intimidating place. That notion of what lies beneath what Herman Melville called the ocean's skin, this kind of liminal membrane between us and the rest of this extraordinary dimensional environment. It's real. I mean, for a kid, it's really forbidding, I think, especially if you're my parents, they didn't know how to swim, the notion of actually joining that element, physically joining it, is quite intimidating. Partly because my mind was full of all the things that you are now exploring, this notion of the benthic depths and what might lie down there. My introduction to the sea was my children's encyclopedias.
Oh, really?
And when I'd open a book, part up the entry to do with the ocean, and there were pictures of fishes on them. I couldn't actually even touch those pages. I had to turn them like that because I felt that if I touched the picture of an anglerfish, it would drag me down into... I was very over an imaginative child, clearly. So I think that's why what you do really fascinates me, because you create a kind of context for what's down there. And the great beauty of science, it doesn't give answers, it asks questions. And for a writer, I'm a, quotes, a creative writer, that is extraordinary. I mean, that's such material, isn't it? Because this notion of an alien environment which is part of our planet, and yet which is almost totally unknown. I think we only have identified a quarter of the species down there. Only 3 people I know has been down to the very bottom of that, down to the Marianas Trench, That sense of the unknown is always, the human imagination, that sense of the darkness to be filled by something. And isn't it true that for so long we thought there was no life down there?
Well, the birth of oceanography was really the expedition of HMS Challenger in something like 1872. And that expedition, if you like, was to go and test that hypothesis. So they trawled the ocean depths, they collected things from the deep, and every single trawl they brought up, sure enough, there was life down there. But until that point, people thought there'd be nothing down there. But that expedition blew away that sort of that theory of the deep, and those collections of foraminifera through to sort of larger shells through to larger fish are still kept at the Natural History Museum and are still studied now, if you like, as the baseline for which we can compare how has the deep ocean changed since 1872 to the present day. And I think that's a relatively short period of time for a scientific discipline. So again, working in a discipline that's only 150 years old is fantastic, because there's still so much to find out, so many questions to ask and try and answer. So.
Absolutely, and actually the object I've brought was not a book, but this has been down there, like you. This has been down there. It's the tooth of a sperm whale.
Wow.
And as you know, they're one of the deepest diving mammals. Yep. This is not actually a very big tooth for a sperm whale. They get rather bigger than this. So this is down there on this animal, which dives down for more than a mile, spends up to 2 or 3 hours down there hunting, using its echolocation to identify squid. This has been in contact with that. It was obviously part of the animal. I just imagine, the kind of huge, I imagine Architeuthis, the giant squid or the colossal squid, being sort of impaled. In fact, actually, the sperm whales suck in their prey. But that notion of this animal, which like us is mammalian, which shares this, it needs to breathe this air. It needs to come back to the surface. So rather like you, it's exploring those depths as well. Earlier this year, I was in Sri Lanka. We were diving with sperm whales. We were with a pod of 150 sperm whales. Wow. And amazing, almost a scene from Moby Dick, really, to be amongst these animals. And they were mating. Wow. So they actually weren't bothered about us. They were very much more interested in themselves. Yeah. They were having sex underneath us, and these extraordinary animals. And just to be in the water with those animals, to hear their communication, hear those echolocating clicks, which they use to communicate. As well as finding food, it was amazing, and extraordinarily that sort of whole encounter changed because a pod of orca came in and started trying to predate the sperm whales, and then ended up chasing us out of the water. Actually, the orca chased us out of the water and actually rammed our boat and tried to tip it over. But so that notion of, and I think particularly my interest is in whales and cetaceans because they break that liminal barrier. They demonstrate that life down there. So when a whale breaches, and I'm sure you've seen that plenty of times, even when a dolphin starts bow riding the compression wave at the front of a boat, it's is a kind of manifestation of what's down there. That unseenness that you study is sort of made manifest and made physical by the whale. That's what interests me about cetaceans specifically, and also because cetaceans are laden with a particular narrative. Because of our exploitation of them. When I was a boy in the 1960s, there were boats coming up here from the South Atlantic laden with whale blubber, which was then processed into stork margarine.
Here in Southampton? In
Southampton, yeah, when I was a boy. And now we look at these animals as kind of emblems of natural threat. And that's really interesting, I think, to me. And for you, what do you see? I mean, anyone who works with the sea now has great concerns. What are the things what are your nightmares about the sea?
Well, what's interesting, rereading this book actually, is that we knew a lot of this in the 1970s. So none of this is new. We knew that humans were having a massive impact on the ocean. We knew we're heating up the ocean. We knew we're disposing our waste in the ocean, and that waste was found by the early explorers. When they went down to the deep ocean, they found our plastic bottles, they found car tires, and they find that we have, essentially polluted even the deepest depths. Okay, but I think my biggest worry is really heat. We're heating up the atmosphere, and thereby we're heating up the oceans. The oceans make up 70% of the surface of the planet. That heat gets into the oceans, that makes the oceans expand, that rises sea level. And so we have to find a way of controlling the temperature increase on this planet. We have to keep it to ideally within 2 degrees centigrade, ideally within 1.5 degrees centigrade. Otherwise, the ocean is going to essentially rise up and flood large areas of the planet that we live in. It's going to have catastrophic impact on humanity. And so I think that's really the biggest problem for our generation and the people that come after us. But I think, we are the stewards of the ocean. We have to look after this fabulous planet. We only have one planet, and our job is to make sure that we steward the deep ocean, we make the right decisions, and we collectively, internationally, actually look after this fantastic resource. So.
What specific insight have you had, specifically in your discipline, in your work, have you had on that? Can you bring it down to a sort of microcosmic level almost?
I think probably it is that going down in this little mini submarine and looking out of the porthole and seeing, a beer bottle, seeing something that we've just casually tossed off the side of the ship that has gone down through 3-4 kilometres of water and sits there on the seafloor, will be there forever. I mean, it will be there for millions of years. It will not dissolve. It will not. So humans have this massive impact that is there for geological timescales, and I think that to me is a symbol of our impact on and the way that humans, through not thinking about the consequences of disposal at sea, are changing the planet forever.
And I think the great problem about that is that we literally physically turn our backs on the sea. I mean, you and I live in Southampton. I bet sometimes you can go for days without seeing the sea. I mean, not particularly you're working here, so you do see the sea, but even people who are sort of concerned or enlightened about it, and we're living in a port city right next to it. If you think most people don't consider, partly because of that notion of what can happen below the surface, the invisibility of it. And the notion of the pollution, now that the hot topic is plastic, isn't it? And that's something which, this direct connection between that water bottle that you drink, and have in your hand for maybe 5-10 minutes, and that's there for perpetuity almost, isn't it? How does that affect you emotionally?
I think it's very. I think. Perhaps our interest in the ocean has really only come about when we've been able to look at the planet from the outside. So those early Apollo astronauts that took those fabulous photographs of planet Earth and realised that planet Earth was actually a watery planet. Those are the images, to my mind, really changed the way we think about this planet, because we're up against it. We can't really get that perspective of how big the oceans are and how deep the oceans are and how enormous that vast area out there is. And so I think it's with being able to stand back and look down, and thereby we get an ability to have an oversight of our responsibility for this planet. and the vastness of the problem and the challenge.
And that's so true, because that revelation occurred at the same time as a scientist called Roger Payne lowered a hydrophone into the water off Bermuda and recorded the sound for the first time of the humpback whale singing. Oh, wow. So, and it was exactly the same time as the Apollo missions were going on, that actually we realised that we're looking for aliens out there, and actually the aliens are down there all the time. And suddenly these animals, which had before been regarded as dumb, sort of unable to protest their abuse, they suddenly had a voice, and it wasn't just a voice, it was a kind of poetic lament. I mean, that's anthropomorphizing, but actually, I think that's the moment at which, together with what you say, that notion of seeing, you know, like the NASA astronauts seeing Earthrise, the context that you put that in so beautifully, and the notion that actually these animals had a cultural life. We now talk about cetaceans, whales and dolphins having a cultural life. These revelations, and these revelations are happening so quickly, these scientific discoveries. I mean, I'm sure within your career you've seen an exponential growth in our knowledge of the ocean.
Yeah, so I think what struck me was this 1977, the discovery of hydrothermal vents, and nobody predicted that they would be there, nobody understood the complexity of the animals that would live around them, that chemosynthesis would be the base of the food chain that would drive these stunning oases on the seafloor. That was before my career started, by the way. But I was a child in 1977, and since that time, we have transformed our understanding of how the oceans work, how they're stirred up, how they control the climate, how they will essentially control the temperature and the weather patterns that we experience here in Southampton, and that interaction between the oceans and the atmosphere and the ice on the planet, and how all of those things feed back to each other, I think, has been an incredible sort of step forward for science. But we still haven't answered the questions. We're asking the questions, but we haven't really got the answers. We can't predict the future, and we know it's going to be different, and it's going to be challenging. But we're not very good yet at actually predicting what it's going to be like, so we can actually, you know, change our behaviours or change the way we build cities or change the ways we operate internationally to manage that.
It's quite, I mean, to sort of quote Star Trek, it's the final frontier in a way on our planet. And in many ways, the issues of this century are embodied physically by the ocean, what we're doing to the ocean. It's absorbed a lot of the heat that we have pumped into we've allowed to pump into the atmosphere. There's almost a sort of sacrificial element to it in a way, you know, this notion that it absorbed our sins in a way. Do you get frustrated by the way science is portrayed sometimes, the way politics intervenes in science, especially the science that you're doing, which is quite challenging?
Yeah. I mean, I think we're in troubled times at the moment. I mean, things are difficult, and we've seen this massive transition to where maybe people are willing to make policy decisions without very much evidence at all. You know, I grew up in a time where science evidence underpinned an awful lot of decision making, and I believe that by becoming a scientist and by being able to articulate, this is the evidence why we shouldn't dispose plastic in the ocean, this is the evidence why we shouldn't put radioactive waste in the ocean, this is why we shouldn't pump carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, that evidence would then underpin government decisions. We seem to have moved on to a period of time where facts actually are not treated with the respect that they were in the past, and it does really worry me. You know, so what our job in the university is to train the next generation of scientists, and we have to say to our students, you know, your job is to actually pick up this baton and make sure that you challenge this at every moment, that you articulate your science in as clear and understandable way as possible. That's our job, is to be able to convert what we're doing into something that's understandable to everybody, you know, the public, the policymakers. But beyond that, we have to challenge at every juncture to ensure that we're listened to. And what worries me is that we seem to be moving to a future whereby our voice isn't heard in the same way. So it's fabulous that you're writing these books and getting out there. You know, I listen to you on, you know, book at bedtime, and people all around the country from all different backgrounds are listening to those stories about the ocean. And that's really, really important because, you know, scientists do find it hard sometimes to communicate clearly and in a way that people understand. So we absolutely rely on people from other disciplines to help us do that.
And I rely on you for my stories. And I think actually what our conversation proves that actually people do care. People do care about these things. And just want to say thank you for what you do.
Yeah, thank you.